Hello and welcome back to Storytime Classics Live, produced by Southwest Shakespeare Company. I am your host, Bo Heckman. Today we will be picking up with The Count of Monte Cristo again, with Chapter 6, entitled The Deputy Procurer du Roi. Thank you for joining us today. Hope everyone is having a great Thursday. As with the reads now, I encourage comments on the book and an intelligent discussion on the material. I have some questions sent to me already by my email, and I am working on those because those were great questions. They're having to do with some of the politics leading up into this, the Napoleonic era and his being deposed and exiled, and the seriousness of when Dantes says that he was there in the room with him on that certain journey, that could be seen as a very scandalous. So here we are with Count of Monte Cristo. He's been at his wedding, and he's let me back up a bit and say that his three friends, oh dear goodness, quotation fingers, it's a terrible thing, terrible habit, must be broken. Please give to the Quotation Fingers Fund to stop quotation fingers. His three supposed friends get very drunk, or what? At least one of them gets very drunk the night before. I think they're all drinking. Anyway, beside the point, they hatch a plan that is really devious to get him arrested and put away and out of the way, so they could gain the love from Mercedes. Anyway. Two of them agree it's a bad idea or whatever like that. And then one picks up the crumpled plan after everyone leaves or as everyone's leaving. So it actually follows through with this drunken plan, and two of them unaware that it's actually going forward. Anyway, I'm babbling. So long story short, they're at Dante's wedding to Mercedes, and he is arrested on the charges that they have sort of drummed up there. So he's been taken away, and the report is not good. Charges of having to do with Napoleon. Okay, so my terrible last time on. We will go into the book with Chapter 6, The Deputy Procurer du Roi. In one of the aristocratic mansions built by Puget in the Rue de Grande Cour, opposite the Medusa Fountain, a second marriage feast was being celebrated, almost at the same hour with the nuptial repast given by Dantes. In this case, however, although the occasion of the entertainment was similar, the company was strikingly dissimilar. Instead of a rude mixture of sailors, soldiers, and those belonging to the humblest grade of life, the present assembly was composed of the very flower of the Marseille society, magistrates who had resigned their office during the usurper's reign, officers who had deserted from the imperial army and joined forces with Conde, and younger members of families brought up to hate and execrate the man whom of families brought up to hate and whom 5 years of exile would convert into a martyr, and 15 of restoration elevate to the rank of a god. The guests were still at table, and the heated and energetic conversation that prevailed betrayed the violent and vindictive passions that then agitated each dweller of the South, where unhappily for 5 centuries religious strife had long given increased bitterness to the violence of party feeling. The emperor, now king of the petty island of Elba, after having held sovereign sway over one half of the world, counting as his subjects a small population of 5 or 6,000 souls, after having been accustomed to hear the vivid Napoleons of 120 millions of human beings uttered in 10 different languages, was looked upon here as a ruined man, separated forever from any fresh connection with France or claim to her throne. The magistrates freely discussed their political views. The military part of the company talked unreservedly at Moscow and Leipzig, while the women commented on the divorce of Josephine. It was not over the downfall of the man, but over the defeat of the Napoleonic idea that they rejoiced, and in this they foresaw for themselves the bright and cheering prospect of a revivified political existence. An old man, decorated with the cross of St. Louis, now rose and proposed the health of King Louis. It was the Marquis de Saint-Méran, his toast recalling at once the patient exile of Hartwell and the peace-loving King of France, excited universal enthusiasm. Glasses were elevated in the air d'anglais, and the ladies, snatching their bouquet from their fair bosoms, strewed the table with their floral treasures. In a word, an almost poetical fervor prevailed. "Ah," said the Marquis de Saint-Méran, a woman with a stern, forbidding eye, though still noble and distinguished in appearance, despite her 50 years. Ah, these revolutionists who have driven us from those very possessions they afterwards purchased for a mere trifle during the reign of terror, would be compelled to own, were they here, that all true devotion was on our side, since we were content to follow the fortunes of a falling monarch, while they, on the contrary, made their fortune by worshipping the rising sun. Yes, they could not help admitting that the king, for whom we sacrificed rank, wealth, and station, was truly our Louis the Well-Beloved, while their wretched usurper, his been and never will be to them their evil genius, their Napoleon the accursed. Am I not right, Villefort? I beg your pardon, madam. I really must pray you to excuse me. But in truth, I was not attending to... I have lost my place. Give me just a moment. I am apologizing here. Attending to conversation. Marquis, interposed the old nobleman who had proposed the toast. Let the young people alone. Let me tell you, on one's wedding day, there are more agreeable subjects of conversation than dry politics. Never mind, dearest mother, said a young lady and lovely girl, with a profusion of light brown hair and eyes that seemed to float in liquid crystal. 'Tis all my fault for seizing upon M. de Villefort, so as to prevent his listening to what you said. But there, now take him. He is your own for as long as you like. M. Villefort, I beg to remind you, my mother speaks to you. If the Marquise will deign to repeat the words but imperfectly caught, I shall be delighted to answer, said M. de Villefort. "Never mind, Renee," replied the Marquise, with a look of tenderness that seemed out of keeping with her harsh, dry features. "But, however all other feelings may be withered in a woman's nature, there is always one bright, smiling spot in the desert of her heart that is the shrine of maternal love. I forgive you. What I was saying, Villefort, was that the Bonapartists had not our sincerity, enthusiasm, or devotion. They had, however, what supplied the place of those fine qualities," replied the young man, "and that was fanaticism. Napoleon is the Mahomet of the West, and is worshipped by his commonplace but ambitious followers, not only as a leader and lawgiver, but also as the personification of equality." "He," cried the Marquise, "Napoleon, the type of equality? For mercy's sake, then, what would you call Robespierre? Come, come, do not strip the latter of his just rights to bestow them on the Corsican, who, to my mind, has usurped quite enough. Nay, madam, I would place each of these heroes on his right pedestal, that of Robespierre on his scaffold in the place of Louis Quinze, that of Napoleon on the column of the Place Vendôme. The only difference consists in the opposite character of the equally advocated by these two men. One is the equality that elevates, the other is the equality that degradates. One brings a king within reach of the guillotine, the other elevates the people to a level with the throne. Observe," said Villefort, smiling, "I do not mean to deny that both these men were revolutionary scoundrels, and that the 9th Thermidor and the 4th of April in the year 1814 were lucky days for France, worthy of being gratefully remembered by every friend to monarchy and civil order. And that explains how it comes to pass that, fallen, as I trust he is forever, Napoleon has still retained a train of parasitical satellites. Still, Marquise, it has been so with other usurpers. Cromwell, for instance, who was not half so bad as Napoleon, had his partisans and advocates. Do you know, Villefort, that you are talking in a most dreadfully revolutionary strain? I do excuse it. It is impossible to expect the son Griandin to be free from a small spice of the old leaven. A deep crimson suffused the countenance of Villefort. "'Tis true, madam," answered he, "that my father was a Grindon. He was not among the number of those who voted for the king's death. He was an equal sufferer with yourself during the Reign of Terror, and had well nigh lost his head on the same scaffold on which your father perished." "True," replied the Marquise, without wincing in the slightest degree at the tragic remembrance thus called up. "But bear in mind, if you please, that our respective parents underwent persecution and proscription from diametrically opposite principles, in proof of which I may remark that while my family remained among the staunchest adherents to the exiled princes, your father lost no time in joining the new government, and that while the citizen Noirtier was a Girondinin, the Count Noirtier became a senator." "Dear mother," interposed Renee, "you know very well it was agreed that all these disagreeable reminiscences should forever be laid aside." "Suffer me also, madame," replied Villefort, "to add my earnest request to Mademoiselle de Saint-Méran's that you will kindly allow the veil of oblivion to cover and conceal the past. What avails recrimination over matters wholly past recall? For my own part, I have laid aside even the name of my father, and altogether disown his political principles. He was, nay, probably may still be, a Bonapartist, and is called Nortier. I, on the contrary, am a staunch royalist, and style myself de Villefort. Let what may remain of revolutionary sap exhaust itself and die away with the old trunk, and condescend only to regard the young shoot which has started up at a distance from the parent tree, without having the power, any more than the wish, to separate entirely from the stock from which it sprung. Bravo, Villefort, cried the Marquis. Excellently well said. Come now, I have hopes of obtaining what I have been for years endeavoring to persuade the Marquis to promise, namely, a perfect amnesty and forgetfulness of the past. With all my heart, replied the Marquis. Let the past be forever forgotten. I promise you, it affords me as little pleasure to revive it as it does you. All I ask is that Villefort be firm and inflexible for the future in his political principles. Remember also, Villefort, that we have pledged ourselves to His Majesty for your fealty and strict loyalty, and that our recommendation the king consented to forget the past as I do. And there she extended to him her hand, as I do at your entreaty. But bear in mind that there should fall in your way anyone guilty of conspiring against the government. You will be so much the more bound to visit the offense with rigorous punishment, as it is known you belong to a suspected family. Alas, madame, returned Villefort, my profession, as well as the times in which we live, compels me to be severe. I have already successfully conducted several public prosecutions and brought the offenders to merited punishment. But we have not done with the thing yet. Do you indeed think so? Inquired the Marquise. I am at least fearful of it. Napoleon in the island of Elba is too near France, and his proximity keeps up the hopes of his partisans. Marseille is filled with half-pay officers who are daily, under one frivolous pretext or another, getting up quarrels with the royalists. From hence arise continual and fatal duels among the higher classes of persons, and assassinations in the lower. You have heard, perhaps, said the Comte de Cerverot, one of M. de Saint-Méran's oldest friends and chamberlain to the Comte d'Artois, that the Holy Alliance purpose removing him from thence. Yes, they were talking about it when we left Paris, said M. de Saint-Méran. And where is it decided to transfer him? To St. Helena. For heaven's sake, where is that? Asked the Marquise. An island situated on the other side of the equator, at least 2,000 leagues from here, replied the Count. So much the better. As Villefort observes, it is a great act of folly to have left such a man between Corsica, where he was born, and Naples, of which his brother-in-law is king, and face to face with Italy, the sovereignty of which he coveted for his son. Unfortunately, said Villefort, there are the treaties of 1814, and we cannot molest Napoleon without breaking those compacts. Oh, well, we shall find some way out of it, responded M. de Salverot. There wasn't any trouble over treaties when it was a question of shooting the poor Duc de Enghien. Well, said the Marquise, it seems probable that, by the aid of the Holy Alliance, we shall be rid of Napoleon, and we must trust to the vigilance of M. de Villefort to purify Marseille of his partisans. The king is either a king or no king. If he be acknowledged as sovereign of France, he should be upheld in peace and tranquillity. and this can best be effected by employing the most inflexible of agents to put down every attempt at conspiracy. 'Tis the best and surest means of preventing mischief. Unfortunately, madame, answered Villefort, the strong arm of the law is not called upon to interfere until the evil has taken place. Then all he has got to do is to endeavor to repair it. Nay, madam, the law is frequently powerless to effect this. All it can do is to avenge the wrong done. Ah, M. de Villefort, cried a beautiful young creature, daughter to the Comte de Savareau and the cherished friend of Mademoiselle de Saint-Méran, do try and get up some famous trial where we are at Marseille. I never was in a law court. I am told it is so very amusing. Amusing, certainly, replied the young man, inasmuch as, instead of shedding tears, as at the fictitious tale of woe produced at a theatre, you behold in a law court a case of real and genuine distress, a drama of life. The prisoner whom you there see pale, agitated, and alarmed, instead of, as is the case when a curtain falls on a tragedy, going home to sup peacefully with his family, and then retiring to rest, that he may recommence his mimic woes on the morrow, is removed from your sight merely to be reconducted to his prison and delivered up to the executioner. I leave you to judge how far your nerves are calculated to bear you through such a scene. Of this, however, be assured, that should any favorable opportunity present itself, I will not fail to offer you the choice of being present. For shame, M. de Villefort, said Renée, becoming quite pale. Don't you see how you are frightening us? And yet you laugh. Why would you have? 'Tis like a duel. I have already recorded sentence of death, 5 or 6 times, against the movers of political conspiracies, and who can say how many daggers may be ready sharpened, and only waiting a favorable opportunity to be buried in my heart. Gracious heavens, M. de Villefort, said Renée, becoming more and more terrified, you surely are not in earnest. Indeed I am, replied the young magistrate with a smile. And in the interesting trial that young lady is anxious to witness, the case would only be still more aggravated. Suppose, for instance, the prisoner, as is more than probable, to have served under Napoleon. Well, you can expect for an instant that one accustomed, at the word of his commander, to rush fearlessly on the very bayonets of his foe, will scruple more to drive a stiletto into the heart of one he knows to be his personal enemy than to slaughter his fellow creatures merely because he knows to be personal fellow creatures merely because bidden to do so by one he is bound to obey. Besides, one requires the excitement of being hateful in the eyes of the accused, in order to lash oneself into the state of sufficient vehemence and power. I would not choose to see the man against whom I pleaded smile, as though in mockery of my words. No, my pride is to see the accused pale, agitated, and as though beaten out of all composure by the fire of my eloquence. Renée uttered a smothered exclamation. Bravo! Cried one of the guests. That is what I call talking to some purpose. Just the person we require at a time like the present, said a second. What a splendid business that last case of yours was, my dear Villefort, remarked a third. I mean the trial of the man for murdering his father. Upon my word, you killed him ere the executioner had laid his hand upon him. Oh, as for parricides, and such dreadful people as that, interposed Renée, it matters very little what is done to them, but as regards poor unfortunate creatures, whose only crime consists in having mixed themselves up in political intrigues, why, that is the very worst offense they could possibly commit? For don't you see, Rene, the king is the father of his people, and he who shall plot or contrive aught against the life and safety of the parent of 32 millions of souls is a parricide upon a fearfully great scale. I don't know anything about that, replied Rene. But M. de Villefort, you have promised me, have you not, always to show mercy to those I plead for. Make yourself quite easy on that point, answered Villefort, with one of his sweetest smiles. You and I will always consult upon our verdicts. My love, said the Marquise, attend to your doves, your lapdogs and embroidery, but do not meddle with what you do not understand. Nowadays, the military profession is in abeyance, and the magisterial robe is the badge of honor. There is a wise Latin proverb that is very much in point. Sident arma togae, said Villefort with a bow. I cannot speak Latin, responded the Marquise. Well, said Rene, I cannot help regretting you had not chosen some other profession than your own, a physician, for instance. Do you know, I always felt a shudder at the idea of even a destroying angel? Dear good Rene, whispered Villefort as he gazed with unutterable tenderness on the lovely speaker. Let us hope, my child, cried the Marquis, that M. de Villefort will prove the moral and political physician of this province. If so, he will have achieved a noble work, and one which will go far to efface the recollection of his father's conduct, added the incorrigible Marquise. Madame, replied Villefort, with a mournful smile, I have already had the honor to observe that my father has, at least, I hope so, abjured his past errors, that he is, at the present moment, a firm and zealous friend to religion and order, a better royalist, possibly, than his son, for he has to atone for past derelictions, while I have no other impulse than warm, decided preference and conviction. Having made this well-turned speech, Villefort looked carefully around to mark the effect of his oratory, much as he would have done had he been addressing the bench in open court. Do you know, my dear Villefort, cried the Count de Salvieux, that is exactly what I myself said the other day at the Tuileries, when questioned by His Majesty's principal chamberlain touching the singularity of an alliance between the son of Girondin and the daughter of an officer of Duc de Cong. And I assure you, he seemed fully to comprehend that his mode of reconciling political differences was based upon sound and excellent principles. Then the king, who, without our suspecting it, had overheard our conversation, interrupted us by saying, Villefort, observe that the king did not pronounce the word Nortier, but, on the contrary, placed considerable emphasis on that of Villefort. Villefort, said His Majesty, is a young man of great judgment and discretion, who will be sure to make a figure in his profession. I like him much, and it gave me great pleasure to hear that he was not about to become the son-in-law of the Marquis and Marquise de Saint-Méran. I should myself have recommended the match, had not the noble Marquis accepted my wishes by requesting my consent to it. Is it possible the king could have condescended so far as to express himself so favorably of me? Asked the enraptured Villefort. I give you his very words, and if the Marquis chooses to be candid, he will confess that they perfectly agree with what His Majesty said to him. when he went 6 months ago to consult him upon the subject of your espousing his daughter. That is true, answered the Marquis. How much do I owe this gracious prince? What is there I would not do to evince my earnest gratitude? That is right, cried the Marquise. I love to see you thus. Now then, were a conspirator to fall in your hands, he would be most welcome. For my part, dear mother, interposed, Providence will only permit petty offenders, poor debtors, and miserable cheats to fall into M. de Villefort's hands. Then I shall be contented. Just the same as though you prayed that a physician might only be called upon to prescribe for headaches, measles, and the stings of wasps, or any other slight affliction of the epidermis. If you wish to see me the king's attorney, you must desire for me some of these violent and dangerous diseases, from the cure of which so much honor redounds to the physician. At this moment, and as though the utterance of Villefort's wish had sufficed to effect its accomplishment, a servant entered the room and whispered a few words in his ear. Villefort immediately arose from the table and quitted the room upon the plea of urgent business. He soon, however, returned, his whole face beaming with delight. Renée regarded him with fond affection, and certainly his handsome features, lit up as they then were with more than usual fire and animation, seemed formed to excite the innocent admiration with which he gazed on her graceful and intelligent lover. You were wishing just now, said Villefort, addressing her, that I were a doctor instead of a lawyer. Well, at least I resemble the disciples of Escapulus in one thing, that of not being able to call a day my own, and even that of my betrothal. And wherefore were you called away just now? Asked Mademoiselle de Saint-Méran, with an air of deep interest. For a very serious matter, which bids fair to make work for the executioner. How dreadful! Exclaimed Renée, turning pale. Is it possible, burst simultaneously from all who were near enough to the magistrate to hear his words. If my information prove correct, a sort of Bonaparte conspiracy has just been discovered. Can I believe my ears? Cried the Marquise. I will read you the letter containing the accusation, at least, said Villefort. The king's attorney is informed by a friend to the throne and the religious institutions of his country that one named Edmond Dantes, mate of the ship Pharaon, this day arrived from Smyrna after having touched at Naples and Porto Fiaro, has been the bearer of a letter from Murat to the usurper, and again taken charge of another letter from the usurper to the Bonapartist club in Paris. Ample corroboration of this statement may be obtained by arresting the above-mentioned Edmond Dantes, who either carries the letter for Paris about with him, or has it at his father's abode. Should it not be found in the possession of a father or son, then it will assuredly be discovered in the cabin belonging to the said Dantes on board the Pharaon. But, said Renée, this letter, which, after all, is but an anonymous scrawl, is not even addressed to you, but to the king's attorney. True, but that gentleman being absent, his secretary, by his orders, opened his letters, thinking this one of importance. He sent for me, but not finding me, took upon himself to give the necessary orders for arresting the accused party. Then the guilty person is absolutely in custody, said the Marquise. Nay, dear mother, say the accused person. You know we cannot yet produce him guilty. He is in safe custody, answered Villefort, and rely upon it. If the letter is found, he will not likely be to be trusted abroad again, unless he goes forth under the especial protection of the headsman. And where is the unfortunate king? Asked Rene. He is at my house. Come, come, my friend, interrupted the Marquise. Do not neglect your duty to linger with us. You are the king's servant, and must go wherever the service calls you. Oh, Villefort, cried Rene, clasping her hands and looking towards her lover with piteous earnestness. Be merciful on the day of our betrothal. The young man passed round to the side of the table where the fair pleader sat, and leaning over her chair, said tenderly, To give you pleasure, my sweet Rene, I pour all the lenity of my power. But if the charges brought against this Bonapartist hero prove correct, well, then you really must give me leave to order his head to be cut off. Rene shuddered. Never mind that foolish girl, Villefort, said the Marquise. She will soon get over these things. So saying, Madame de Saint-Méran extended her dry, bony finger to Villefort, who, while imprinting a son-in-law's respectful salute on it, looked at Rene as much to say, I must try and fancy 'tis your dear hand I kiss, and it should have been. These are mournful auspices to accompany a betrothal, sighed poor Rene. Upon my word, child, exclaimed the angry Marquise, your folly exceeds all bounds. I should be glad to know what connection there can possibly be between your sickly sentimentality and the affairs of the estate. Oh, mother, muttered Rene. Nay, madame, I pray you pardon this little traitor. I promise that you make up for her want of loyalty. I will be most inflexibly severe. Then casting an expressive glance at his betrothed, which seemed to say, Fear not, for your dear sake my justice shall be tempered with mercy. And receiving a sweet and approving smile in return, Villefort quitted the room. Chapter 7. The Examination. No sooner had Villefort left the salon than he assumed the grave air of a man who holds the balance of life and death in his hands. Now, in spite of the mobility of his countenance, the command of which, like a finished actor, he had carefully studied before the glass, it was by no means easy for him to assume an air of judicial severity, except the recollection of the line of politics his father had adopted. Prudence. With his own career, Gerard de Villefort was as happy as a man could be. Already rich, he held a high official situation. Though only 27, he was about to marry a young and charming woman, whom he loved, not passionately, but reasonably, as became a deputy attorney of the king, and besides her parents' family possessed desert in his crowns, and he had, besides, the prospect of seeing her fortune increased to 500,000 at her father's death. These considerations naturally gave Villefort a feeling of such complete felicity that his mind was fairly dazzled in its contemplation. At the door, he met the commissary of police, who was waiting for him. The sight of this officer recalled Villefort from the third heaven to earth. He composed his face, as we have before described, and said, I have read the letter, sir, and you have acted rightly in arresting this man. Now inform me what you have discovered concerning him and the conspiracy. We know nothing as yet of the conspiracy, monsieur. All the papers have been sealed up and placed on your desk. The prisoner himself is named Edmond Dantes, mate on board the three-master the Pharaon, trading in cotton with Alexandria and Smyrna, and belonging to Morel and Son of Marseille. before he entered the merchant service? Had he ever served in the Marines? Oh, no, monsieur. He is very young. How old? 19 or 20 at the most. At this moment, and as Villefort had arrived at the corner of the Rue de Conseil, a man who seemed to have been waiting for him approached. It was M. Morrel. "Ah, M. de Villefort," cried he, "I am delighted to see you. Some of your people have committed the strangest mistake. They have just arrested Edmond Dantes, mate of my vessel." "I know it, monsieur," replied Villefort, "and I am now going to examine him." "Oh," said Morrel, carried away by his friendship, "do you not know him? You do not know him, and I do. He is the most estimable, the most trustworthy creature in the world. And I will venture to say there is not a better seaman in all the merchant service. Oh, M. de Villefort, I beseech your indulgence for him." Villefort, as we have seen, belonged to the aristocratic party at Marseille, Morrel to the plebeian. The first was a royalist, the other suspected of Bonapartism. Villefort looked disdainfully at Morrel and replied, "You are aware, monsieur, that a man may be estimable and trustworthy in private life, and the best seaman in the merchant service, and yet be, politically speaking, a great criminal. Is it not true?" The magistrate laid emphasis on these words, as if he wished to apply them to the owner himself, while his eyes seemed to plunge into the heart of one who, interceding for another, had himself need of indulgence. Morrel reddened, for his own conscience was not quite clear on politics. Besides, what Dantes had told him of his interview with the Grand Marshal and what the Emperor had said to him embarrassed him. He replied, however, "I entreat you, M. de Villefort, be, as you always are, kind and equitable, and give him back to us soon. This give us sounded revolutionary in the deputy's ear." Ah, murmured he. "Is Dantes then a member of some Carbonari society? And that his great protector thus employs the collective form? He was, if I recollect, arrested in a tavern, in company with a great many others. Then, he added, Monsieur, you may rest assured I shall perform my duty impartially, and that if he be innocent, you should not have appealed to me in vain. Should he, however, be guilty, in this present epoch, impunity would furnish a dangerous example, and I must do my duty." As he had now arrived at the door of his own house, which adjoined the Palais de Justice, he entered after having coldly saluted the ship owner, who stood as if petrified on the spot where Villefort had left him. The antechamber was full of police agents and gendarmes. In the midst of whom, carefully watched, but calm and smiling, stood the prisoner Villefort traversed. Villefort traversed the antechamber, cast a side glance at Dantes, and taking a packet which a gendarme offered him, disappeared, saying, "Bring in the prisoner." Rapid as had been Villefort's glance, it had served to give him an idea of the man he was about to interrogate. He had recognized intelligence in the high forehead, courage in the dark eye and bent brow, and frankness in the thick lips that showed a set of pearly teeth. Villefort's first impression was favorable. But he had been so often warned to mistrust first impulses that he applied the maxim to the impression, forgetting the difference between the two words. He stifled, therefore, the feelings of compassion that were rising, composed his features, and sat down grim and somber at his desk. An instant after Dantes entered, he was pale but calm and collected, and saluting his judge with easy politeness, looked round for a seat, as if he had been in M. Morel's salon. It was then that he encountered for the first time, Villefort's look, that look particular to the magistrate, who, while seeming to read the thoughts of others, betrays nothing of his own. "Who and what are you?" demanded Villefort, turning over a pile of papers containing information relative to the prisoner that a police agent had given to him on his entry, and that already, in an hour's time, had swelled to voluminous proportions, thanks to the corrupt espionage of which the accused is always made the victim. "My name is Edmond Dantes," replied the young man calmly. "I am mate of the Pharaon belonging to Messrs. Morel and Son. Morel and Son. Your age?" continued Villefort. 19, returned Dantes. "What were you doing at the moment you were arrested?" "I was at the festival of my marriage, monsieur," said the young man, his voice slightly tremulous. So great was the contrast between that happy moment and the painful ceremony he was now undergoing. So great was the contrast between the somber aspect of M. de Villefort and the radiant face of Mercédès. "You were at the festival of your marriage?" said the deputy, shuddering in spite of himself. "Yes, monsieur. I am on the point of marrying a young girl I have been attached to for 3 years. Villefort, impassive as he was struck with this coincidence, and the tremulous voice of Dantes, surprised in the midst of his happiness, struck a sympathetic chord in his own bosom. He also was on the point of being married, and he was summoned from his own happiness to destroy that of another. This philosophic reflection, thought he, will make a great sensation at M. de Saint-Méran's, and he arranged mentally, while Dantes awaited further questions, the antithesis by which orators often create a reputation for eloquence. When this speech was arranged, Villefort turned to Dantes. "Go on, sir," said he. "What would you have me say?" "Give all the information to your power. Tell me on which point you desire information, and I will tell you all I know. Only," added he with a smile, "I warn you I know very little." "Have you served under the usurper?" "I was about to be mustered into the Royal Marines when he fell." "It is reported your political opinions are extreme," said Villefort, who had never had any opinions. "I am hardly 19. I know nothing. I have no part to play. If I obtain the situation I desire, I shall owe it to M. Morel. Thus all my opinions, I will not say public but private, are confined to these 3 sentiments. I love my father, I respect M. Morel, and I adore Mercédès. This, sir, is all I can tell you, and you see how uninteresting it is. Let me pause here for just a moment. I shall be back in just a second." Hello, hello, hello. I am back. Did you miss me? As Dantes spoke, Villefort gazed at his ingenious and open countenance, and recollected the words of Renée, who, without knowing who the culprit was, has besought his indulgence for him. With the deputy's knowledge of crime and criminals, every word the young man uttered convinced him more and more of his innocence. This lad, for he was scarcely a man, simple, natural, eloquent, with that eloquence of the heart never found when sought for, full of affection for everybody, because he was happy, and because happiness renders even the wicked good, extended his affection even to his judge, despite of Villefort's severe look and stern accent. Dantes seemed full of kindness. "Pardieu," said Villefort, "he is a noble fellow. I hope I shall gain Renée's favor easily by obeying the first command she ever imposed on me. I shall have at last a pressure of the hand in public, and a sweet kiss in private." Full of this idea, Villefort's face became so joyous that when he turned to Dantes, the latter, who had watched the change on his physiognomy, was smiling so. "Sir," said Villefort, "have you any enemies at last? At least, that you know?" "I have enemies," replied Dantes. "My position is not sufficiently elevated for that. As for my disposition, that is, perhaps, somewhat too hasty, for I have striven to repress it. I have had 10 or 12 sailors under me, and if you question them, they will tell you that they love and respect me, not as a father, for I am too young, but as an elder brother. But you may have excited jealousy. You are about to become captain at 19, an elevated post. You are about to marry a pretty girl who loves you, and these 2 pieces of good fortune may have excited the envy of someone. You are right. You know men better than I do, and what you say may possibly be the case, I confess. But if such persons are among my acquaintances, I prefer not to know it, because then I should be forced to hate them. You are young. You should always strive to see clearly around you. You seem a worthy young man. I will not depart from the strict line of my duty to aid you in discovering the author of this accusation. Here is the paper. Do you know the writing?" As he spoke, Villefort drew the letter from his pocket and presented it to Dantes. Dantes read it. A cloud passed over his brow as he said, "No, monsieur, I do not know the writing, and yet it is tolerably plain. Whoever did it writes well. I am very fortunate," added he, looking gratefully at Villefort, "to be examined by such a man as you, for this envious person is a real enemy." And by the rapid glance that the young man's eyes shot forth, Villefort saw how much energy lay hid beneath his mildness. "Now," said the deputy, "answer me frankly, not as a prisoner to a judge, but as one man to another who takes an interest in him. What truth is there in the accusation contained in this anonymous letter?" And Villefort threw disdainfully on his desk the letter Dantes had just given back to him. "None at all. I will tell you the real facts. I swear by my honor as a sailor, by my love for Mercédès, by the life of my father." "Speak, monsieur," said Villefort. Then internally, "If Renée could see me, I hope she would be satisfied, that would no longer call me a decapitator." Well, when we quitted Naples, Captain Leclerc was attacked with brain fever. As we had no doctor on board, and he was so anxious to arrive at Elba that he would not touch at any other port, his disorder rose to such a height that at the end of the 3rd day, feeling as he was dying, he called me to him. "My dear Dantes," said he, "swear to perform what I am going to tell you, for it is a matter of the deepest importance." I swear, Captain, replied I. Well, as after my death the command devolves onto you. As mate, assume the command, and bear up for the island of Elba. Disembark at Portofiaro. Ask for the Grand Marshal. Give him this letter. Perhaps they will give you another letter, and charge you with a commission. You will accomplish what I was to have done, and derive all the honor and profit from it. I will do it, Captain, and perhaps I shall not be admitted to the Grand Marshal's presence as easily as you expect. Here is a ring that will obtain audience of him, and remove every difficulty, said the captain. At these words he gave me a ring. It was time. 2 hours after he was delirious. The next day he died. And what did you do then? What I ought to have done, and what everyone would have done in my place. Everywhere the last requests of a dying man are sacred, but with a sailor the last requests of his superior are commands. I sailed for the island of Elba, where I arrived the next day. I ordered everybody to remain on board, and went ashore alone. As I had expected, I found some difficulty in obtaining access to the Grand Marshal, but I sent the ring I had received from the captain to him, and was instantly admitted. He questioned me concerning Captain Leclerc's death, and, as the latter had told me, gave me a letter to carry on to a person in Paris. I undertook it because it was what my captain had bade for me to do. I landed here, regulated the affairs of the vessel, and hastened to visit my affianced bride, whom I found more lovely than ever. Thanks to M. Morel, all the forms were got over, and in a word I was, as I told you, at my marriage feast, and I should have been married in an hour, and tomorrow I intended to start for Paris, had I not been arrested on this charge, which you as well as I know see to be unjust. Ah, said Villefort, this seems to me the truth. If you have been culpable, it was imprudence, and this imprudence was in obedience to the others of your captain. Give up this letter you have brought from Elba, and pass your word you will appear should you be required, and go and rejoin your friends. I am free then, sir, cried Dantes joyfully. Yes, but first give me this letter. You have it already, for it was taken from me with some others which I see in that jacket. Stop a moment, said the deputy, as Dantes took his hat and gloves. To whom is it addressed? To Monsieur Noirtier, Rue Coq-Heron, Paris. Had a thunderbolt fallen into the room. Villefort would not have been more stupefied. He sank into his seat, and hastily turning over the packet, drew forth the fatal letter, at which he glanced with an expression of terror. M. Noirtier, Rue Coq-Heron, not number 13, murmured he, growing still paler. Yes, said Dantes. Do you know him? No, replied Villefort. A faithful servant of the king does not know conspirators. It is a conspiracy, then? Asked Dantes, who, after believing himself free, now began to feel a tenfold alarm. I have, however, already told you, sir, I was entirely ignorant of the contents of the letter. Yes, but you knew the name of the person to whom it was addressed, said Villefort. I was forced to read the address to know to whom to give it. Have you shown this letter to anyone? Asked Villefort, becoming still more pale. To no one, on my honor. Everybody is ignorant that you are the bearer of a letter from the island of Elba addressed to M. Noirtier? Everybody except the person who gave it to me. And that was too much, far too much, murmured Villefort. Villefort's brow darkened more and more. His white lips and clenched teeth filled Dantes with apprehension. After reading the letter, Villefort covered his face with his hands. Oh? Said Dantes timidly. What is the matter? Villefort made no answer, but raised his head at the expiration of a few seconds, and again pursued the letter. And you say that you are ignorant of the contents of this letter? I give you my word of honor, sir, said Dantes. But what is the matter? You are ill. Shall I ring for assistance? Shall I call? No, said Villefort, rising hastily. Stay where you are. It is for me to give orders here, and not you. Monsieur, replied Dantes proudly, it was only to summon assistance for you. I want none. It was a temporary indisposition. Attend to yourself. Answer me. Dantes waited, expecting a question, but in vain. Villefort fell back in his chair, passed his hand over his brow, moist with perspiration, and for the third time read the letter. Oh, if he knows the contents of this, murmured he, and that Noirtier is the father of Villefort, I am lost. And he fixed his eyes upon Edmond, as if he would have penetrated his thoughts. Oh, it is impossible to doubt it, cried he suddenly. In heaven's name, cried the unhappy young man, if you doubt me, question me. I will answer you. Villefort made a violent effort, and in a tone he strove to render firm. Sir, said he, I am no longer able, as I had hoped, to restore you immediately to liberty. Before doing so, I must consult the trial justice. What my own feeling is, you already know. Oh, monsieur, cried Dantes, you have been rather a friend than a judge. Well, I must detain you some time longer, but I will strive to make it as short as possible. The principal charge against you is this letter. And you see, Villefort approached the fire, cast it in, and waited until it entirely consumed. You see, I destroy it. Oh, exclaimed Dantes, you are goodness itself. Listen, continued Villefort, you can now have confidence in me after what I have done. Oh, command, and I will obey. Listen, this is not a command, but advice I give you. Speak, and I will follow your advice. I shall detain you until this evening in the Palais de Justice. Should any one else interrogate you, say to him what you have said to me, but do not breathe a word of this letter. I promise. It was Villefort who seemed to entreat, and the prisoner who reassured him. You see, continued he, glancing toward the grate, where fragments of burnt paper fluttered in the flames, the letter is destroyed. You and I alone know of its existence. Should you, therefore, be questioned, deny all knowledge of it, deny it boldly, and you are saved. Be satisfied. I will deny it. It was the only letter you had? It was. Swear it. I swear it. Villefort rang. A police agent entered. Villefort whispered some words in his ear, to which the officer replied by a motion of his head. Follow him, said Villefort to Dantes. Dantes saluted Villefort and retired. Hardly had the door closed when Villefort threw himself half fainting into a chair. Alas, alas, murmured he, if the procureur himself had been at Marseille, I should have been ruined. This accursed letter would have destroyed all my hopes. My father must, your past career, always interfere with my successes. Suddenly a light passed over his face. A smile played round his set mouth, and his haggard eyes were fixed in thought. This will do, said he, and from this letter, which might have ruined me, I will make my fortune. Now to the work I have in hand. Having assured himself that the prisoner was gone, the deputy procureur hastened to the house of his betrothed. And we will stop here today and resume with Chapter 8, the Chateau d'If. Thank you for joining us today on Storytime Classics Live, and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow when we will continue the Count of Monte Cristo. As always, discussion is encouraged on any of the chats for this broadcast, whether it be Southwest Shakespeare's Facebook or YouTube page. And there are standing questions in email as well that I want to look into thoroughly because they're really, 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 really good questions. All right. Thank you for joining us today. If you are going outside, please be safe and please wear a mask. Thank you. Thank you. And we will see you next time on Storytime Classics Live.